News when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moskow.
Karen, the ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran appears fragile this morning, even as the U.S. looks ahead to talks this weekend. The White House says Vice President J.D. Vance will lead a delegation to Pakistan on Saturday, along with envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Vance says President Trump's terms are clear.
The deal is a ceasefire, a negotiation. That's what we give. And what they give is the straits are going to be reopened. If we don't see that happening, the president is not going to abide by our terms if the Iranians are not abiding by their terms.
Vice President J.D. Vance spoke to reporters in Hungary. Bloomberg's Patrick Sykes reports the terms of the negotiation are in dispute.
Iran has this 10-point plan that it talks about being the basis for negotiations. It says that the U.S. has accepted that as a basis for talks. The U.S. talks about its own 15-point plan. So it does seem we are still some way apart, even on the very broad contours of what is up for discussion this weekend. That's
Bloomberg's Patrick Sykes reporting from Istanbul. President Trump says the U.S. military will remain around Iran until the, quote, real agreement is fully complied with. If not, he says in a social media post, the real shooting starts. Iran's ambassador to Pakistan posted on X that a delegation would arrive in Islamabad for this weekend's talks tonight. That post has since been deleted without explanation.
Well, Nathan, Iranian officials say Israel's strikes in Lebanon yesterday violated the terms of the ceasefire agreement. Israel launched its largest assault yesterday on Lebanon since the start of its invasion. We get more from Bloomberg Israeli Bureau Chief Ethan Bronner in Tel Aviv.
Everyone has understood that when the U.S. says the war has to come to an end in Iran, Israel will agree. Israel is insisting on more independence in terms of what it does in Lebanon, and generally the U.S. has allowed it to do that. But Vance's statement suggests that they've said to the Israelis, do us a favor here. We're in the middle of this negotiation. Because what the Israelis did yesterday was their biggest single moment operation since the pager thing 2 years ago. 100 planes dropped on targets simultaneously over a period of 1 to 5 minutes, something like that, and killed what they said was hundreds of key Hezbollah operatives.
And Bloomberg Israeli Bureau Chief Ethan Bronner, Lebanon's health ministry, said at least 182 people were killed and hundreds wounded in the operation.
Karen, President Trump is lashing out at NATO's stance on the Iran war following a meeting at the White House with the alliance's Secretary General, Mark Rutte. Here is Rutte after that meeting with the president.
Well, let me be absolutely clear. He is clearly disappointed with many NATO allies, and I can see his point. But at the same time, I was also able to point to the fact that the large majority of European nations has been helpful with basing, with logistics, with overflights, with making sure that they lived up to the commitments.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte made those comments on CNN. A senior NATO official says the U.S. wants specific commitments from European allies on their pledge to help secure the Strait of Hormuz after the fighting in Iran stops. It wants the countries to present concrete plans to ensure navigation through the waterway within days.
Nathan, FBI Director Kash Patel says a former employee of the U.S. military has been arrested for leaking classified information to the media. It comes 2 days after President Trump threatened criminal charges for journalists who published details of a military operation to rescue 2 U.S. airmen in Iran.
Well, we turn now to the markets. Karen, oil is on the rise once again as the Strait of Hormuz remains largely blocked. Brent crude is up 3.2%, trading just shy of $98 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate's not too far behind, up 3.4%. Yesterday, Brent slumped 13%, its biggest one-day drop in 6 years. Ed Morris is senior advisor and commodities analyst at Hartree Partners.
I think we're going to see even more volatility than we've had in the past, and that's been a lot of volatility. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 months, let alone the next 2 weeks. And no matter what happens in terms of a declaration of a ceasefire and an effort to do it, we're not going to see ships moving through the strait except all those lined up, trapped north of the Strait of Hormuz that want to get out.
Hartree Partners commodities analyst Ed Morse says even once Hormuz transit picks up, it could take weeks or possibly longer to return to normal.
And Nathan, stocks are giving up some of yesterday's big gains. Right now, S&P futures are down 0.4%. Yesterday, all three major indexes gained at least 2.5%. The Dow surged more than 1,300 points. Priya Misra is a portfolio manager at JP Morgan Asset Management.
Some of that heated rhetoric over the last few days, it felt like it was coming to a head. So hopefully there is a ceasefire. I think we're watching headlines like everyone is. I mean, there's a lot of questions. I think there's a sigh of relief, but there's a lot of details around who controls the Strait of Hormuz. Is 2 weeks enough to get some sort of a permanence to this?
And JP Morgan Asset Management portfolio manager Priya Misra notes the S&P 500 broke above its 200-day and 50-day moving averages yesterday. And that's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Karen Moskow.
I'm Nathan Hager, and this is Bloomberg.